All right, wrist straps, what they are, why you would want to use them, where to find them, what you're kind of looking for when you're shopping for, and stick around for the end, how to use them, and most importantly, how not to use them.
Let's do this.
All right, let's kick it off. What is a wrist wrap? A wrist wrap is, not surprisingly, a wrap that goes around your wrist.
Get out!
Common lengths are going to be 18, 24 inches. You can find them longer than that as well. But typically you're going to see a design that looks something like this. You're going to see a loop at one end, the thumb loop. You're going to see an elastic body here, and then you're going to see a Velcro closure system at the other end. What's the point of the wrist wrap? Why would you want to use it? Well, a wrist wrap is going to provide support for your wrist. It's going to provide some bracing, kind of an exoskeleton or a belt for your wrist, if you will. So it's going to allow, when your wrist is under compression, when you've got a force pressing down on your wrist, it's going to help your wrist stay straighter as opposed to bending back in extreme extension. When you're shopping for them, what are you looking for? Typically, you're probably going to buy these online, but you can find some in local sporting goods shops as well, and we'll link to a couple of reasonable options below. However, typically you're looking for something in the 18 to, this is going to be the 24-inch option. So you've got an 18-inch option, a 24-inch option. This is also a 24-inch option. It's just a stiffer option. And you can get them in 36 inches, you can get them longer than that, but 36 and longer gets usually kind of on the unwieldy side. So typically you're probably gonna be looking for 18 to 24 inches. Less than 18 inches, don't get it, it's too short, it's not very useful. If you're using, so this is my wrist wrap and I'll use it for some of the Olympic lifts as well as pressing and benching. So if you're using it for Olympic lifts as well as your strength lifts, you might prefer the 18-inch options. If you're just using it for pressing and benching, which is the most common use for wrist wraps, then you might go after something like the 24-inch option. For brands, you've got a lot of options. Mine are Harbinger. You can actually find these at local sporting goods shops as well, typically. These are made by Rogue. This, like I said, is their 24-inch option. These are my wife's. They're also made by Rogue. It's their 18-inch option. These are Pioneer. That's a very good brand. SBD makes some very good wrist wraps as well in kind of stiffer and less stiff options. Stoic makes some good wrist wraps. We'll link to those below. When to use wrist wraps. You may want to use wrist wraps anytime that your wrists are in compression, anytime that your wrist is supporting a load in compression, something is pushing down on your wrist. So if you want to use it on something like a row or a pull-up where your wrist is in tension, you're welcome to do so, but it's certainly not going to help. So what lifts do you want to use them on? Things like the press and the bench press, for instance, where you're trying to maintain a relatively neutral wrist, almost a straight wrist. You may also use them on the Olympic lifts, like a snatch or a clean, and a jerk, of course. Now, a snatch and a clean, they both start off with your wrist in tension, right? That bar is pulling on your wrist. However, it's going to finish, the snatch is going to finish overhead with your wrist in compression. The clean's a little bit of a tricky one. In fact, both of the Olympic lifts can be a little bit tricky. You may have to kind of experiment with how tightly and kind of fidget a little bit with where you wear your wrist strap, because although your wrist is going to be in compression at the end, you're going to need that wrist to have quite a bit of flexibility there. Even in the snatch, your hand is going to be bent backwards when you're catching. In the clean, when you rack it on your shoulders, it is certainly going to be bent backwards. It's going to be in extension. So just bear in mind that the method in which you wear them for your strength lifts, like the press and the bench press, might be a little bit different than exactly how you wear them in your Olympic lifts. When to use them during your workout. For your strength lifts, keep it simple. Generally speaking, you can kind of treat it like your belt. So you can put your wrist straps on for your last warm-up, and then of course also wear them for your work sets as well. For the Olympic lifts, you can put them on as they get heavier. Otherwise, if you've got a wrist that's bugging you, and this applies to the strength lifts as well, if you've got a wrist that's kind of irritated, you may need to start wearing them earlier in your warm-ups. These are general recommendations. Over time, you're going to figure out whether you prefer to have your wrist straps on earlier or later in your warm-ups. But remember, the wrist strap is not a crutch. So in the press, for instance, when we're trying to have our wrist kind of relatively neutral, kind of this position here, if you're unracking the empty bar and your wrist looks like this, that's a problem that you need to solve, not the wrist strap. Last but not least, how to use the wrist wraps. It's pretty simple to use them correctly. It is also, unfortunately, rather easy to use them incorrectly. So let's get to it. Take the wrist wrap. This is going to be the left wrist wrap. You're going to want to get a pair that has a left and a right, and most do. And you're going to place your thumb through the thumb loop here. acts like an anchor. That's its only purpose. Once you're actually lifting, you're going to release the thumb loop. You're going to take it off of your thumb. And you're going to start on the hand. Remember, this is where people get it wrong. When people get it wrong, they're wearing their wrist strap too low. They're wearing it, I'm going to call low, kind of down on the arm down here. So when they get it wrong, they're wearing it down here. Now this is no good. I can bend my hand all over the place. The wrist strap is not doing its job. It's just an arm warmer now. So remember, to be on the wrist, it's got to be both on the hand and on the arm, because the wrist is obviously the joint between those two sections of your body. So make sure that you start the wrist strap up high. So you're going to apply some tension right away. That first wrap is going to go across kind of the back of your hand. In other words, a little bit on the kind of the high side of the wrist. And over time, you can kind of wrap that down a little bit. A 24-inch wrap will let you go around your wrist a few more times than an 18-inch one. But you need to apply some tension. As with some practice, you'll get an idea of how tight it needs to be. However, it should be tight enough that you want to take it off, or at least loosen it in between your work sets or after your warm-up. All right, so you're going to apply some tension. Remember, here's the kicker. It's got to be sitting on the wrist. In other words, somewhat on the hand, somewhat on the forearm. It's got to be sitting high enough that it makes it hard to kind of bend your wrist backwards, because that's the whole point of the wrist strap. It's got to provide some support. Now, if you're starting to lose circulation in your fingers immediately, you've probably got it a little bit too tight. But remember, it should be uncomfortably tight. You should want to take it off or loosen it in between your sets. All right, make sure that you don't leave the thumb loop on. A lot of powerlifting federations actually have a rule that says you cannot lift with the thumb loop on. So you just release it and it just kind of hangs out back here. Now, in between your sets, like I said, you want to loosen it or take them off. What I will typically do is I'll just loosen it. I'll just loosen the Velcro like this. A lot of Olympic lifters will do this. And I'll just kind of let it slide a little bit, and that provides a little bit of relaxation for my wrist, if you will. For my next set, I'm simply going to pinch this thumb loop between my forefinger and my thumb. I'm going to grab the wrist strap, kind of re-tension it here a little bit, and I'm good to go again. That'll wrap things up, and as always, we hope this helps you get stronger and live better.